You know, I've said consistently, and I'll continue to say that this moment with entering into a consent decree with the Department of Justice is really our greatest opportunity we will ever have in order to make real reform. And that our negotiations and our conclusion we reached with the Department of Justice has really been part of how we believe we can gain substantive reform, just not superficial actions. And one of the areas that we looked at and we knew would take us a long way in terms of making that reform is a partnership with the ADAMHS board around mental health. And we're here today to announce that the ADAMHS board under Mr. Dinahan and the city of Cleveland had entered into MOU that really spells out the protocol and the format and the process and procedures of how do we deal with mental health and crisis intervention. Now, that was something in the consent decree. If you read it, it gave us 6 months from the date the judge approved the consent decree to come up with this, but we've pretty much come to a conclusion pretty quickly because we recognized the importance of it, and Mr. Dinahan and his people and our people, led by Assistant Director Eckert, really put a lot of effort into reaching this conclusion that we have today. So what I'll do is, so that you have the right context, I'll have Gary Singletary from the Law Department really talk about the part of the consent decree that deals specifically with the mental health and crisis intervention. And then I'll have Mr. Eckert, Assistant Director Eckert from Safety, talk about what Cleveland's role is in this and some details about that. And then Mr. Dinahan will really wrap it all up and put it in an overall context from his point of view and the average citizen's point of view around mental health. You ready? Good.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Gary Singletary. I'm the Chief Counsel with the City of Cleveland. And what I'm going to address basically is the framework for crisis intervention as it's been developed through the settlement agreement reached with the Department of Justice. And basically, you're probably all aware, on June the 12th of this year, Judge Oliver approved the settlement agreement that had been entered into between the city and the Department of Justice. So the June 12th date, that's important because that is, if you read the agreement, it talks in terms of an effective date. A lot of things happen based on the effective date of the agreement. And so our effective date is June the 12th of this year. And with crisis intervention, the goals that had been set there were, one, to assist individuals who are in crisis, to better protect the police and the families and other individuals interacting with police when there is a crisis of some involving mental health issues. The third thing is to try to work towards community and statewide solutions based on experience as it's gained. And then the fourth major goal that was addressed is trying to reduce the involvement of those with mental health crises with the criminal justice system itself, to try to work better to ensure a good result for those individuals as opposed to direct intervention with the justice system. And so the four parts I'm going to address with you right now. The first part is the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee. The settlement agreement requires that the city establish this Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, and its role is to foster support between the community, the police, the mental health providers, and again to try to work towards developing solutions. As part of addressing the establishment of this particular committee, the city has entered into a memorandum of understanding with the ADAMHS board. And Mr. Dinahan is here and he'll address some specifics of that. But basically what the city, through the ADAMHS board, will be doing is establishing this committee. And the committee is going to be made up of individuals from the city police, the Department of Public Safety, or Division of Public Safety, crisis intervention officers, and then a whole broad, expansive list of community individuals in the mental health community, crisis intervention, and I'm sure Director Denahan can address that further as to who's making up this committee, but the homeless individuals that have an interest in this area. It's a very inclusive list of individuals that will work on this committee. And what this committee is basically going to be tasked with is sort of overseeing in the sense of being aware of and interacting with the city as it develops its crisis intervention policies and training and the service that the city police provide to the community in this regard. And in that regard, part of the understanding with the ADAMHS board is the city and the board are working collaboratively to identify these individuals, especially with the experience of the ADAMHS board as to the universe of those individuals. And the board, or the committee, will also be tasked with, on an annual basis, providing a report that goes into things the city did well, problems the city established, what might it do to better improve its services, more or less on an annual basis, giving an overall review of the crisis intervention policies, training, services in that regard. The second part of the agreement, the consent decree, went to establishing a crisis intervention coordinator. Now, what the Division of Police envision is appointing someone in the rank of captain and working as the intervention coordinator. The individual would be the face, I guess if you want to put it that way, with regards to the city police and overseeing directly the crisis intervention, the services provided, the programs, the training, and it's the first line supervisor as to how the program's working, what kind of training is needed, coming up with a specialized crisis intervention plan, which will be established within a year of the effective date, so June of next year. The third part of the plan goes to the individual officer on the street. It's called the crisis intervention training, and this particular training will address the officers themselves, not the specialized officers, which we'll get to in a second, but just the average officer, what's required of him training-wise with regards to crisis intervention. And the way this is to work under our agreement is that each officer on the street within a year will receive 8 hours of crisis intervention training, which I believe will be provided through the ADAMHS board. The recruits, the class, I believe the recruits going forward in any academy class will receive 16 hours of crisis intervention training. And also a crisis intervention training program will be established for dispatchers, call takers, and their supervisors in how to deal with crisis intervention issues from a telecommunication point of view, to have a better understanding of what kind of a circumstance it might be and how to deal with it. So that's the third part of the crisis intervention plan. The fourth part is the creation of specialized crisis intervention trained officers. Now, even though the city is required to give 8 hours of training to every officer, it's the goal of the city to train all officers in a 40-hour program, which is more or less the baseline for certifying officers as crisis intervention specialists. Even though that's a goal for all officers, what the city has also agreed to do is establish a program for training specialized crisis intervention trained officers, and these are all going to be volunteers, whereas there is training for everyone. These particular officers will be the ones that are designated as crisis intervention officers who will be the goal is to have them responding to any crisis involving an individual in crisis. And they will take charge at the scene, working, of course, through a command structure that might be there. And it's envisioned that every field training officer will receive this training. So as they work with the newer officers, or they'll be in tune with this, the role in the training to give the new officers beyond the 16 hours they get in the academy until they eventually get to this 40-hour training, of a better appreciation of those items. And that's basically a brief overview of the 4 parts. You have the advisory board, which is going to assist the city in developing its programs and services and giving them feedback as to how it's working. You're going to have a crisis intervention supervisor, an officer appointed at the rank of captain, who will actually oversee and daily interact with the department. Third, every officer is going to be trained at a certain level, starting at 8 hours within the next year, 16 hours training for new recruits. And then the last part, which I think Ed Eckert can probably address a little bit more in detail, is the specialized crisis intervention training and the role of these officers on a daily basis. And also to address policies and procedures that the city, as it goes forward in interacting with other state, there's an evaluation, I believe, going on now in Cuyahoga County as to crisis intervention. And so taking feedback from the group doing that analysis and working forward, it's the intention of the city to only try to improve its services, and that's what this agreement details. And basically, if you'd like to actually see the particulars, I'm sure you probably all read it, but if you go to paragraphs 131 to 159, that specifically details the provisions that I've given you a real brief overview. There's more detail than I can go through right this second, but Ed will follow up a little bit on the specialized crisis intervention training in their role.
Good afternoon. My name is Edward J. Eckhart Jr., and I'm an Assistant Director of Public Safety. And as the mayor alluded to, I'm the primary lead for the department on the behavioral health and crisis intervention agreement as it relates to the consent decree, as well as the co-chair with Mr. Denahan on the Behavioral Health Advisory Committee. A couple things that I want to make clear, I think, right up front as it relates to this and the training that is part of this consent decree and the subsequent MOU is one thing is that the training that's been going on that's specific to the crisis intervention, the 40-hour class that you hear discussed, that training's been going on from the ADAMHS board now for almost 10 years for our division of police. As of today, we've got almost 600 officers that have been fully trained in the 40-hour course. One of the first things that became very obvious to me when I started working with Mr. Denahan on this program is that the level of commitment from our community related to this area is phenomenal. Mr. Denahan can give you more details and specifics about what it takes to put on this training, but there are hundreds of volunteers that are involved in this training, and there are hundreds and hundreds of hours that each one of those volunteers puts in. You know, this project and this program as it relates to crisis intervention training and response truly is a community event that everyone has engaged in, and it's been something that's been going on long before you know, the current events. And I think that's a testament to Mr. Denahan's leadership and seeing the importance in this. So what I want to do is just cover some of the details of what the City of Cleveland, the Division of Police, have already done in terms of behavioral health response. In addition to the 40-hour training that we're conducting, we've got 4 classes going on this year. In addition to that, the cadets that will be graduating, or I'm sorry, will be starting in our October academy will receive the 40-hour training prior to hitting the streets. We are also in the process of identifying a core curriculum for all of our call takers and dispatchers. And what's important to remember about that is if we don't get it right on the front end of a 911 call in identifying all of the information and the potential markers that would identify the resources that need to get sent, we're already behind the curve. So through the ADAMHS board, through this advisory committee, we will be creating a core curriculum that all of our call takers and dispatchers will receive. And that training is going to be expanded beyond just our police call takers and dispatchers. All of our public safety telecommunicators will receive this training over time so that whether callers get police, fire, or EMS, they will all have the same level of training and have had the protocols and the policies in place to ensure that however that information comes into our 911 system, the appropriate resources are identified and are dispatched. The next piece that we've already done is to ensure that we know which of our zone cars that are out on the street every day have CIT trained officers on board. It's a requirement every day that the OICs of the districts forward that information to the communications center. So as we identify someone in crisis through the 911 system, those cars are the ones that are deployed and respond to these situations so that we ensure we've got people that are trained and are on scene. The second piece that we've already done is to ensure a collaborative and cohesive operational protocol between the Division of Police and the Division of EMS as it relates to mental health and behavioral emergencies. Often calls will come in and someone may have a hesitancy to cooperate or go along with police, but if an ambulance is on scene and they're being attended to by paramedics, their response to those first responders is very different. So we wanted to make sure that not only are we providing the community with the highest level of resource that they can, but we're also providing our police officers an additional resource so that in the event that they have somebody that may not be cooperative, they do have that other level of resource that they can call on to assist them. The other thing that we've already worked on is in terms of our data collection. That's very important because truly the goal to behavioral health and our ability to get out in front of the crisis and diminish the overall community need for us responding to people in crisis is to ensure that these individuals are connected to all of the different resources that are available through the ADAMHS board, through our health systems. And one of the ways that we can make sure that we get that information is through these forms that our police officers complete when they interact with people in behavioral health crisis. So we've established that new form that identifies the reason for the call, any pertinent background that may be helpful to social workers, any information related to prior interactions with that individual, what the outcome was with that individual, and those forms are collected and they're forwarded to the ADAMHS board and all of those healthcare professionals at the ADAMHS board. So now they have an opportunity to vet that information and really ultimately with the goal of contacting those individuals outside of them having a crisis so that we can plug them in to other resources that may be helpful to them avoiding getting in crisis in the first place. Because really that's our ultimate goal here, is to get to the point where we don't have 911 calls for people in behavioral health crisis. Get them into a continuous care situation where they're being followed proactively, where true mental health professionals are interacting with them on a regular basis, and get to the point where the only time that they have to have a situation where they need to dial 911 is a very extreme, extraneous circumstance. The other part of what we're doing as it relates to the consent decree and the MOU is our activity and participation on the Behavioral Health Response Committee. I am actually the co-chair of that committee to Mr. Denahan's chairmanship. We have Deputy Chief O'Neill, who is also an active participant on that committee. And Mr. Singletary alluded to the fact that there is a new position that's been created as a result of the consent decree for a CIT coordinator. That individual is the one that will have the responsibility of identifying our overall program, making a recommendation to the advisory board on how that program should be implemented, what are the resources that are necessary, and then the advisory board, through the subcommittees that are established, will then assist and provide recommendations to the Division of Police as to how we will go ahead and implement those recommendations and how we operationalize those recommendations. But again, I think it's really important for everybody to understand the level of work and commitment from Mr. Denahan and all of his volunteers at the ADAMHS board has been phenomenal. A lot of people, a lot of dedicated people that truly have the community's best interest at heart, and I don't want that to get lost with all of the other issues that are around the consent decree. Now I'm going to ask Mr. Denahan to come up, and he can give you more details as it relates to the ADAMHS board role in this process.
Thank you, Ed. In the briefing, the mayor called me the wrap-up man. Mayor, I want to tell you, we wouldn't be wrapping up if it wasn't for your leadership and guidance through this process. That in your vision, you know that we can make a significant difference in the overall relationship between our first responders and our citizens. So thank you for that leadership, Mayor. I appreciate it. I'd be remiss if I didn't comment on Safety Director McGrath. We would not be where we're at today unless it wasn't for him. He was chief 10 years ago that allowed us to begin doing the CIT program. So it's not new. It's not starting out brand new. That's not what this decree MOU does. It enhances a good program to be the most outstanding program that's going to make a significant difference in the way we're administering safety and security to our citizens on the streets. So it simply says, fostering a relationship between police, community, and mental health professionals. Easily said. Translated, there's a whole number of responsibilities for the ADAMHS board. The ADAMHS board, through the MOU with the City of Cleveland, is responsible to administer this whole process. And administering the process, I'm joined in a very happy working relationship with Ed Eckhart as chairing the Mental Health Advisory Committee. And within that responsibility is the appointment of members to the Mental Health Advisory Committee. And we have, actually, Mayor, we have until November 26th to have our first meeting. We had our first meeting last week, and 40 members showed up. And those of you who are interested in knowing the names, and we could have that sent out to you. But these are individuals who are involved every day in this whole business of providing direct service for mental illness, whether it's a hospital worker, a psychiatrist. We also have family members. We also have clients that have mental illness, and professionals of all kinds that are on a volunteer basis. If we calculate the number of hours of volunteers, it would be astronomical. And it adds to the depth of commitment that they have. So the board is responsible for setting up this advisory committee. And in that first meeting, we decided to have 4 subcommittees. Now, I don't want to get too deep in, but I want to tell you how important it is. One of the things that you want us to do, Mayor, is to provide a report to the community by January 31st of this coming year as to the effectiveness of the CIT program in the number of calls, the trends, the number of officers placed in the right position, are they adequately trained, what is the relationship with the public. Those are all the answers you want to receive in January. We want to ask those questions now, not worry about the first or second week of January and saying we don't have the forms right. So we had a data committee that is setting that up, and through the collaboration of already previous meetings we had with the safety department, we're a step ahead, and that those forms will be out this coming week, so that we know the questions we want to answer. They'll be built on the questions that the police officers will be putting in these forms. If that's all there was to this, this would be a very shallow program, but that's not all it. What happens to those calls that, for example, repeat themselves 2 or 3 times in a night? Same caller. What happened to those calls that shows up the next weekend or the next week with the same issue? We are going to have follow-up on those type of calls, and we have been just awarded, we're a joint award for the City of Cleveland and the ADAMHS Board for a grant that will give us money to have a pilot program in the 2nd District on the 2nd shift of trained Cleveland police officer, a psychiatrist, a social worker that will go out on those calls where greater depth is needed or there's follow-up relative to some of the instances I just shared with you. The whole idea is to not only decriminalize mental illness in the criminal justice system, but also reduce the number of calls and be far more effective as to how we're helping those that have mental illness and or addiction on the streets. So it's not only the Cleveland Police, it is the mental health system that is also in this revolution that will have to change so that we are following up on those calls that we will get from the Cleveland Police Department. And wow, at this address, there's been 5 calls in the last 5 weeks with the same address with the same person. What should we do about it? Is the person receiving their medication? What is the story? So we need to follow up on that. We're not doing that right now, and I know that. And I think with this program will make us far better in understanding our responsibilities to help those with mental illness on the streets. Part of the MU calls for us to be in the community. We have all of our meetings in the community. We have a number of committees that training, diversion, trying to give police officers greater opportunity as to what to do with a person besides the opportunity of arresting and booking. Why not have treatment versus incarceration? Or if they need medical help, they'll be taken directly to St. Vincent's Hospital, which they're doing right now. But there's other opportunities that I think that with our pilot that we can engage in greater diversion. One of the things that we know right now, anybody in this business knows the comment, our largest mental health hospital is the prison system. And if we could get to the heart of it as a call in the neighborhood, then we'll be dealing more directly with it and more effectively. This program gets to that. And it gets to it, we hope, in a very effective way. So, Mayor, this is an extraordinary opportunity, an extraordinary adventure. This is change in progress. This will make a difference, and I am so pleased and proud to be here with you and the City of Cleveland and my colleagues through here. So thank you for allowing us to do it. Thank you very much.
All right, questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Eckert, you said 600 officers have received 40 hours of training?
Yes.
Full training?
Come on, please.
Okay. So why did DOJ, it sounds like a lot of officers with a lot of training and knowledge about how to deal with the mentally ill, but yet DOJ found a problem.
This is not your question. You know, that's in the past. We're talking about now and the future. I've had those kind of conversations in the past about how we did not agree on things completely, but we have reached agreement and consensus on how to proceed going forward. And going forward, all of our officers over a period of time will have 40 hours of training, which means they will be certified as a crisis intervention specialist. And not only that, we will have some special officers who will be even hired, have a higher training that will be assigned to each district. And as we move forward, working with the ADAMHS board, we will then move towards the civilianization of crisis intervention, where they will have people able not only to follow up on people who are consistently in the system, consistently part of our call volume, but will also be working with us as crisis right at that moment.
I'm sorry, if you could let me follow up, are there CIT, I think it's what you call them, officers assigned to the districts now?
Oh yes, there are over 600 officers. They are throughout the district, throughout the city. So there are some in the district. As Mr. Eckhart said, one of the responsibilities of the officer in charge, the OIC officer of that day, is to identify to the dispatchers who is on duty at that time who have this training. So if they need to dispatch an officer who has to have this training, then they will know who that officer is. So yeah, they're throughout the district, throughout the city, but eventually every officer will be trained in all the districts.
One follow-on, I promise to shut up. Is that, you've been training for 10 years, so has there been a protocol in place to get the specially trained officers to mental health crisis situations?
Yeah, we've been, Mr. Dinahan's going to answer that. The point is that we had, as you said, some disagreements. As we agreed, our point was that we wanted all of our officers trained. During this period of time, we have always been training officers in crisis intervention. This is more under a structured environment, a structured protocol, as opposed to just an officer here and an officer there. This is a real systematic, structured approach to dealing with crisis intervention.
Like any training, training over time changes. And sometimes you need retraining even if nothing changes. That's one part.
And we're going to be doing that during our annual in-service training. Part of the annual training of officers will include some continuing education in this area.
Exactly. And the other part, when we start off, we were mental health only. We're now mental health and alcohol and drug addiction. And while I haven't mentioned, that's also part of the program. So many of the officers weren't given the opportunity about addiction issues. So that's included in it. The other part is the whole sense of cultural competency and paying more attention to that in training. And again, after 10 years of training, we want to make sure that the opportunity is to do some retraining.
Mr. Dinahan, could you go into some explanation, a little more fully, on how often do you see the Mental Health Advisory Committee meeting on a regular basis? How will that play out?
My last couple of weeks is quite often.
But going forward.
Well, there wasn't a actual advisory committee. There wasn't until this MOU was protected. Although we set up on our own to have our own mental health advisory committee that advised the mayor and the Department of Justice on recommendations to be carried forward in the consent decree. This was one of those recommendations.
40, I'm talking about the new group of 40. How often?
Well, we'll be meeting probably at least once a month and probably twice a month in some committees to answer some real tough questions relative to our responsibilities in January. We need to figure out how we work with the Police Commission, the Monitor, and the City of Cleveland, because we'll be working on a regular basis with the Safety Director and the Chief of Police with recommendations and changes in admissions to protocol. So that will be an ongoing basis. We'll probably be meeting at least once a week, and in many cases, because of our subcommittees, twice a week.
The full committee of 40? will be
No, the full committee will be meeting once a month. There are those on the executive committee. We have brought the bureaucracy in here to organize this. We'll probably be meeting a great many times.
And last question, what's the total number of dispatchers currently, if you know, who are trained now in CIT?
I don't know. I think that
I don't know that now, not off the top of my head. We can get it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, we could.
While you're still up there
It
too,
is a number.
Yeah.
Mr. Dinahan, you had mentioned earlier that there is a grant providing money for a pilot program that would get a psychiatrist and a social worker to address some of the repeat calls. What is the amount of that money and where's it coming from?
we're getting $200,000 from SAMHSA, $100,000 a year, and the ADAMHS board is putting $150,000 in a year. So the grant and the amount is worth $250,000. I'd mentioned this to the mayor earlier. We would do this anyhow. It's the right thing to do, and it's in the progression of advancing the whole avenue of meeting those on the street with mental illness, and what's the follow-up, and are the right people meeting and making thoughtful decisions. This helps us get to that particular point. It's a pilot program, and as I understand by the director, it'll be in the second district on the second shift.
And that's with a psychiatrist and social worker, 2 people?
We're going to have 2 or 3 people. We're working that out. And when I say we're working it out, in that we had to wait to see how much the grant was approved. And we have that now, so Mr. Eckhart and I and our team will be working on it. I don't think it'll take too much longer. We need a police officer. We need a psychiatrist at the minimum. We may need a 3rd person to help organize and that. So we checked with other cities that do this, and they have 2 or 3 people, and we'll work from that arrangement.
Thank you.
Mr. Dinahan, these changes in the MOU, they sound very familiar, like the recommendations made in March when you and about 50 other mental health experts presented those recommendations to the city and the DOJ. Is there any of those recommendations significant recommendations that didn't make it into this MOU?
Well, if they are, they have totally escaped my thought. Because what we have here is the willingness of the mayor and the safety director and the chief wanting to train everybody in the department. The first responders, all 40 hours, brand new cadet classes, 40 hours, all police officers, either 10 or 10 or more officers. That was in our recommendation. We said that it should be the, I think it was the car plan, and a smaller number of hours for everybody else. So that meets it and actually exceeds it. And the other part that's impressive is the part about the specialization of the call takers and the dispatchers and their training. So I think that, if anything, they've not only met it, in some areas they've exceeded it.
One of the really kind of intriguing things that was discussed here is the decriminalizing of mental health, I believe was the phrase you used. Could you talk about that some more?
Sure. There was a time when we didn't have a CIT training, and people were either taken to the hospital or to jail. And we realized that in some infractions that they're of a lesser degree, that they're carrying out and acting out of their mental illness, that should be thought of as treatment rather than incarceration. And that was actually pushed on by the judicial system, setting up mental health courts and having decisions coming through the justice system and then making a decision that they receive treatment and not incarceration. So the evolution says, well, what about the officer on the street? Giving the officer the opportunity to, if they could recognize the symptoms and the person does not have a direct mental illness, medical illness, that they could take them to a specific treatment area. The other part is the officers are very familiar with individuals on the streets. They already know their names, some know the medication, and some know who they're being treated by. Why not take advantage of that familiarity, which creates a better, stronger relationship with the community, and allow that to happen? That's what's going on. So when I'm talking about decriminalization, I'm talking about providing the opportunity, instead of arresting for a minor misdemeanor, having the person put in for treatment for when a person so many times gets to feel good, stops taking their medication, and things go bad for them.
So does this mean giving officers more discretion to make judgments on arrest decisions?
No, it means that they have the knowledge and ability to determine what is proper discretion. That's what it means.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you have to give the officer their ability to make some decision. This equips them with the knowledge and ability to make the proper decision when they're engaged in. Could you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that, and they already have the discretion to make their decision. Training gives them a better base on how that decision is made, and that's exactly what the mayor said.
Can you give us a timetable for the rollout of the enhanced training for police officers?
Well, we've already begun. Actually, the question was a rollout of the enhanced training. Many of these have already begun. We have another police training class. Carol Ballard is the person that does a great job. Stand up, Carol, so everybody can see you. I want to recognize her. She does a great job as our coordinator of that, and she advises me. The next class is October 5th. And many of these things will be put into that class, but the advisory committee will be working on such things as preparing recommendations to the chief and the safety director of different protocol changes, policy changes relative to CIT training and CIT administration. That'll be ongoing. The pilot program, which is extremely important, we hope to begin as soon as possible. And we want to put that on the fast track. So we just found that out in this last couple of days. So we want to put that as soon as possible so that we could have something before the end of the year. And the other thing is having the rank of captain, as the coordinator says, really clear that the city of Cleveland is taking this seriously. It is up the chain of command to a rank where the person could get to the chief or the safety director, and I appreciate that, having been here before.
And to follow up on that, we, even before we entered into the consent decree, we were working in many areas to do things that we knew that, that we wanted to be part of the consent decree. The DOJ had talked about it, and so we began to work on it. So that's why a lot of this stuff is already in motion. The MOU kind of formalizes it, and then the grant gives us the ability to take it up a notch where we would not have been able to do it but for the grant and some money from the ADAMHS board.
So officers on the force now are getting 8 hours of training, and that will be ramped up to?
No, they're getting, some of them have had 40. We were doing 40. I think in the academy they'll be doing, how many? 16 in the academy. And then in there, every year you do continuing education and the in-service training, I think they'll be doing 16, is that right?
On an annual basis.
On an annual basis. So it's the basic training part that gives them the ability to be specialists. And then every year they get a refreshment of that. And so we're working on the officers who are currently police officers. And then in the cadet class, we're doing it there. So we're working at both ends, hoping that, knowing that we can get it completed in a shorter period of time. So everybody is familiar as they hit the street. Yes, sir.
Mayor, tomorrow is the deadline
Yes.
for the independent monitor.
I appreciate you waiting till we cover the other stuff.
Will you be making an announcement on that?
We'll be, let's put it this way. The judge has given us a deadline, and the judge expects an outcome. Whether that announcement comes tomorrow or the next day, you know, because the judge is also involved in this, so we're having conversations.
So it could be postponed.
I can't say that. I'm saying that tomorrow's the deadline, and the judge was pretty clear about what he said. And we're having conversations with the judge and the DOJ and things like that. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of time between now and the end of the day tomorrow. So we're working. There are people who are very heavily engaged in trying to draw this to a conclusion. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.